It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you. As always, I'm recording this episode inside the Furman Garner Performance Studio here at KUAF. It is just the only public radio station in Northwest Arkansas, but KUAF is a great partner with the podcast, and we're certainly honored to be able to record in here on a regular basis when we're not out in the field. And so today I have a special episode for you. This episode's going to be kind of meta, if you will, because not only are I'm going to interview an individual that has come on, has been nice enough to join me on this episode, but we're going to talk about podcasting. So this is a podcast episode about podcasting and among other things. Just so, button up and get strap into this particular episode. I think you're going to really enjoy it. My guest today is T.I. King. And T.I. King is the founder of the Arkansas Podcasters group called RCast. And RCast they've started in Little Rock, but they are basically covering the whole state, hence the word RCast. And so he, along with Brittany and Karen Stewart, are the brainchild behind this program. And I got to meet them, I would say, sometime last year when they invited me to speak at their first Arkansas Podcasters get together. And RCast had basically, the way they broke it up is they had a session in Little Rock, and then they had a session up here in Northwest Arkansas. And T.I. and the rest of the team were kind enough to invite me to participate up in Bentonville. And we had a blast. It was a great time. It was a real small, eclectic crowd of people, some that were podcasters, some that were thinking about podcasting. But it was just good. I always like sharing, and it was just really good to be around these guys. And now these guys have really hit it mainstream. I mean, T.I. and Brittany and Karen, they went and presented at Podcast Movement, which I have spoken at numerous times, and really close friends with the founders of Podcast Movement, which I think it could arguably be the largest podcasting program in the world in terms of people that participate. There's several thousand that come to every event that they have, and they do it twice a year, once in the summertime and once in the springtime. And so T.I. got to speak in the spring. And so anyway, I'm blathering, but I'm so excited to have T.I. here today. T.I., welcome to the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So listen, I want to get into just the nitty and the gritty of this. And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, outside of just all the amazing work that you're doing and the time that you spend driving back and forth through the Bobby Hopper Tunnel from Little Rock up here to Northwest Arkansas to be a part of this scene up here. And I call it a scene because there are actually several podcasters up here. And certainly Irvin Camacho comes to mind with his amazing podcast. And, we're doing a lot of, there are a lot of new podcasts that are coming online, and I can't even keep track of all of them. But I'd love for you just to kind of tell the audience a little bit about who T.I. is. But then let's start talking a little bit about, how podcasting has impacted you.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start off with one correction. My name's Ty.
Oh, it is Ty.
Yeah, it's okay. It happens all the time.
Okay. All right.
So back, it was in 2001 or 2002, something like that. I was going through Hastings, if you remember that store when it was around, when you had the CDs and the books and all that stuff, movies. I saw the rapper T.I. had put out an album called King. And I knew right then I should have trademarked my name because he stole it before I could. Now hotels are so disappointed every time I show up.
Right.
T.I.'s coming.
T.I.'s coming.
And then I show up and they're like, you don't look anything like him.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Okay. So Ty. Okay. Yes, I will remember that then.
No problem at all.
I will make sure. So. Yeah. But give us your superhero origin story.
Okay. I don't know if it's such a superhero origin story, but it could have been a villain at any point, right? So I have used podcasting since 2018. I guess I started getting into it. I started listening to it way back in the early days. I think, Kevin Smith used to put out podcasts in the early 2000s where you would have to go on their website, download an MP3, load it onto your MP3 player, and then you'd listen to it from there. So I guess that was back before they even called it podcast.
Oh,
you know
absolutely.
what I mean? It was just shows that they were recording, putting together. And so, yeah, I've been listening to that forever. And my grandparents put me onto these cassette tapes of the War of the Worlds.
Okay.
H.G. Wells and a lot of those, The Shadow, The Phantom, all those things from back in those days. I used to love those radio dramas like that, especially if it had a dark edge to it. Oh, yeah. I was into it. Yeah.
And the Lone Ranger, too.
Yes.
Yeah. They were all, and Dick Tracy.
Yep.
I mean, there were a bunch of them, like serial programs that they had available. And I remember listening to The Phantom and several others. And I remember War of the Worlds. And I mean, that captured the mind and the fascination of the American public at a time when radio was
absolutely
at its height.
Right.
And then people were able to listen to those because you and I certainly weren't around when those were first aired.
Right.
I know we look old, but we're not that old. And certainly it gives you a kind of a glimpse into what it was like to storytell at a time when, audio was the main format of disseminating and sharing information.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an impactful way to, just tell a story, period. And like you said, back then, that was the height of radio. And so like a lot of people didn't realize if they were just turning their radio on at that time, after the part where they were like, by the way, this is just a play.
Right.
And they're like, this is real.
I know.
We're getting attacked by aliens right now.
Yeah.
That's great. I love the lore behind it. But anyways, so yeah, I've been in love with the audio form of storytelling for a very long time.
Okay.
And then I guess I didn't start using it until 2018 when I started a marketing business and realized it was a great tool. And there was such a low barrier to entry to do it that I couldn't get into the room with a lot of the people that I wanted to talk to, There were decision makers and C-level executives that I could not even get in the door of their office. And I could cast a shadow, through the doorway and couldn't get past the secretary. So started a podcast and started inviting them on as guests. Oh, so easy. People are so, they're so just flattered. You want me on your podcast?
Have you ever met someone that was not afraid to talk about themselves?
Oh, absolutely.
Or just what they do.
Even
for
introverts.
The most part.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
It is the ultimate calling card.
Yes.
I think podcasting
to
me is, from a business development perspective, it is the greatest calling card. I have anecdotal proof of how well it works when you're trying to get in front of the decision makers and individuals that you want to talk to about your business and about what you offer and the services. It's one of the best ways to get in front of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it was beneficial for me because then I get masterclass, one-on-one masterclass with them. And obviously I'm producing a show and then they get free marketing out of it because I'm, talking about it online and they're also producing and talking about it online. And all I've got to do is just create the material, shove it to them, be like, here, promote this show. And so, and then it gets me in their circles one way or another. Anyways, that's how I sort of built it up on business. But once the business was going really well and I was doing a lot of donated and volunteer time through nonprofits, I started getting recognized by different organizations. And one of them was the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in 2021.
Okay.
And they put me on what's called the Finest Honorees list for that year. And that means that you're a young individual that is donating and volunteering a lot of time for nonprofits. And they're just sort of, lifting you up as a leader in business and giving back to humanity one way or another. Anyways, with that, there was also a fundraising element for the organization itself. Of course, you were expected to raise so much. Turns out, I wasn't so great at first of raising funds because I'm really bad at asking somebody, hey, can I have $1 in your pocket, please?
Sure.
Yeah. Let me just pull one out.
Right.
I'm like, here, let me give you $1.
Yeah, right.
That's how I am. Right. So I held a few little fundraiser events in coffee shops and it barely made a dent into anything. So I was like, well, what's an event that I could create here that we don't have in Arkansas that I would just have fun at and it would make a difference anyway. And so there's a podcast. I didn't really know about podcast movement until after we'd already started all this. But there's one in Austin. It's called RTX.
Okay.
Which that just ended that whole company and everything. But RTX was in Austin for a few years. And it was just a big celebration of podcasting and bringing together all these different personalities and people on stage and people that are getting to network. And it's so cool how you bring in all these different ecosystems and societies and neighborhoods and people of all the different walks of life and be able to talk. You're sharing your stories and that's impactful. That's what we should have been doing throughout humanity this entire time, right?
Right.
So yeah, I loved it. And I was like, well, I'll just go ahead and start it here. I already know a lot of podcasters here because of the podcasting journey I've already been on. And I'll just take the ones that are the most successful that I can see, in Arkansas, because it's so hard to narrow down who is just an Arkansas podcaster, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a worldwide platform and not everybody advertises themselves.
Right.
And some people just do it for fun. And, so we don't have that one definitive person where we're like, oh, that's the podcaster of Arkansas, right? Because they made it super successful. So I gathered people in different areas, made sure it was, diverse in subject and race and just everything across the board. And so music, traveling, anybody I could, even YouTubers, was bringing them on. And so it went great. And so I was so happy by the end of that thing. And it went so well that we kept getting contacted by people. Hey, when are you going to do the next one? What are you going to do for next? And so got with, Brittany and Karen, and we created an actual nonprofit organization because we started looking it up. Turns out there's not one in the country. There's no such thing. There's many, many, many arts nonprofits across the country that are specifically for helping artists. None of them for podcasting.
That's interesting.
It is. Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I would have thought there would have been at least a few, right?
Yeah.
And maybe there are some under the arts umbrella that don't necessarily delineate the fact that primary focus is podcasting, but we're under, and maybe they do it, I don't know, for fundraising purposes or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Cool. Podcasting sounds like it's like the Rudolph of the reindeer. You know what I mean? You don't want to play the games. So we're not artists. If we're not artists, are we journalists? Oh, we're not journalists either. Okay,
we're storytellers.
Okay. Well, what does that put us?
Yeah.
So we're not writers, also. Okay.
Right.
Well, so we're just our own little island over here. No, I don't think so. Anyway, so I was like, well, we need to start this nonprofit organization to where we can specifically help people because you always get those questions, especially after the festival of how do I get started? What do I do? Oh, I think I have an idea for something. Is this any good? Can you hear me out? I don't know where to go to record. I don't have the equipment. It's the same questions over and over and over and over. And I was like, well, we can make this organization to where we're answering those questions. We're giving people one-on-one coaching for free. We're taking grant money, which is given to the state from federal government. So federal gives it to state. State is supposed to hand it out to artists in the state. They give it to organizations that are already in place. Okay. But those, because, the lawmakers don't want to be responsible for saying this is good art and this is bad art, right? So they hand it off to these nonprofit organizations. The nonprofit organizations are supposed to be awarding this money out. It comes from the state. Okay. The problem is those art organizations usually give it to visual artists, right? And so it's usually painting or some sort of filmmaking or something like that. So podcasting really has not been in that circle. And I've had those conversations with a lot of the leaders of those organizations and had to argue why podcasting is an art.
Sure.
It's so strange. But yeah, it seems like it's like dirt's brown, sky's blue. It's so strange. So yes, what we're doing is we are taking some of those funds and we are helping people get time in the studio and coaching. And we're also having these podcast festivals and networking and workshops that we do across. We have events all throughout the year, but yeah, everything leads up to our main, podcast festival towards the end of the year. And that's the huge thing where we try to gather everybody in and try to make it bigger every year. We try to get in more national speakers every year, more national known names as podcasting to come in and sort of, this is an area of the United States that we're the flyover states, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, everything happens on the East Coast, West Coast, and we sort of get left out in the middle. And so you've left us alone for 200 years. We've made our own, sort of way of life here. We are an organism that you just left, but we've grown and we've evolved. You guys should come see what we're doing now because, people outside the state, what you think of an Arkansan, what you think that is? That's so antiquated. What's your idea is?
It's not accurate. That's for sure.
No, not for sure.
It's not accurate. So, and it's funny you say that because, I've had several friends and they all ask, man, you're in Arkansas. What's it like there? You're doing a podcast there? And then, for somebody like me that's doing a podcast that is a hyper local podcast. So I'm not pulling on, although we have listeners from around the country, we actually have listeners from around the world, but our primary audience is right here in our backyard. Yeah. Those are the people that we're going after outside of those that we inform and educate about considering a move to Arkansas or considering a move to Northwest Arkansas. Our audience is right here in Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, and Bentonville, and Bella Vista, and Eureka Springs, and Siloam. So we'll include all of those. But the bottom line is that it's right here. So we're only going to have a small sample size to choose from. Whereas like I have friends that have podcasts and, maybe they're doing a marketing podcast. Well, anybody that wants to know how to improve themselves from a marketing perspective when it comes to business, they potentially would listen to that.
Right.
But if you have no interest in Arkansas and or Northwest Arkansas, you're not going to really listen to my podcast. unless you just like the stories that I tell.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, there is that. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's something out there for everyone. That's to me is the beauty of podcasting. And I do see it. It's interesting what you said. I do see it as an art form because it's a form of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of how we told stories back in the day in cave drawings,
yes,
and then stories were passed down in an oral tradition,
right?
That's all we're doing with podcasting.
Yeah, and it endures.
Yeah, it does. It does endure. And the nice thing about it now is that I can remember stories that my grandparents used to tell me growing up that I only wish I had recorded. But now this conversation that you and I are having is being memorialized.
Right.
It will be shared out. It's kind of evergreen, and it's something that, who knows, somebody 7 or 8 years from now will listen to and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I just think the possibilities are endless with podcasting.
Yeah, for sure. And, like you said, if you don't have any interest, like for you, right? I am Northwest Arkansas, right?
Right.
If you don't have any interest in Northwest Arkansas, you may not like it. But also there's the draw of like the personality and the conversations that you're having with other people. So maybe they have no interest of ever coming, but like they like the conversations. And so it goes with that complaint that a lot of people have. They're like, well, I think that, maybe I shouldn't do a show because the market is flooded. Okay. Well, you don't think that way with movies and film because we've got how many indie podcasts, festivals or indie film festivals that happen across the country and across the world. And, you're heavily encouraged to become a filmmaker. So podcasting is the same way. Yeah. Even if, there's somebody that already puts out very similar content to what you're wanting to put out, someone is going to pick you over them because they enjoy the cadence of your voice or the way that you present the material. Two people can have the exact same script, record, repeat it. Inevitably, somebody's going to prefer you over them. Somebody's going to prefer them over you. And that's just the way that it's going to be. It's the same way with way people, pick the news. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Tomato.
Exactly,
I mean,
right.
you're just going to gravitate towards certain people.
Exactly right.
I like long form storytellers. So I can listen to Andrew Huberman or Joe Rogan. I typically prefer Rich Roll. All of them do long form podcasting. Yeah. They all cover a wide variety of subjects, but you're just going to find different people that gravitate towards different things. So I think that's the beauty of it. And that's, to me, is one of the unique aspects of podcasting is that there's probably, in a lot of instances, there is a podcast out there for everyone.
Oh, for
Would
sure.
you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just and I love it when people come to me and they say, yeah, I just started messing around on that Apple podcast and I didn't realize that was even on my phone, which I find to be really funny, but it is the case because people are like, how do I get your podcast? I'm like, do you have an iPhone? They were like, yeah. See that little purple icon right there? Podcast. It says podcast. I'm right there. That's where I live. I live in your phone. You don't even know that. T.I. lives in your phone. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's just, it's a lot of it is just education, right? Yeah. And I mean, and you guys, I mean, you and Brittany and Karen are playing the long game, just like I am playing the long game as far as this is concerned, because I do believe that there will come a time when podcasts are ubiquitous, both in audio format exclusively as well as audio and video.
Yes.
Because I'm a purist when it comes to podcasting. Okay. I was an audio first guy, but I have slowly gravitated towards doing video. Like we're not doing video today, we're doing audio, but there's just something around it that's just like, this is actually really cool. But I see the benefits because of the way that we learn and the way that things impact us, sometimes visually first. But then I've also can remember several stories that I've heard that really all I heard were the audio versions of the stories that really impacted me, And so, I mean, and that happens all the time. And so, I mean, the bottom line is that there is something out there for everyone when it comes to podcasting. And when people say, oh, it's too late, it's really not too late.
No,
it's just it's one of those things where, it is continuing to grow. There's plenty of room for everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
So what are you finding now first of all, I didn't really know all the backstory about how you got Arcast started and the work that you've been putting in behind the scenes. And that's truly a yeoman's task to get out there and get in front of people and just, really try to convince people that, hey, this is real. This is something. What are you finding are kind of like the biggest aha moments for you as you have traveled along this journey of awareness and introduction of podcasting to the wider audience?
Well, I think, when we were having conversations about what to do with Artcast itself, should we start a nonprofit organization? Should we start a for-profit? Should we just keep it as a festival that happens every year?
Yeah.
I think the thing that really pushed us into the nonprofit area was, of course, helping people. But I don't think we would have gotten there if it hadn't been for seeing how the podcasting community sort of cares for each other, And so it's so easy to walk up to somebody that's in podcasting and there's not a gatekeepery type of attitude, you walk up and you can ask them, oh, how do you do this? Well, how'd you, and people will, hey, let's go get some coffee. I'll gladly sit here and tell you the story about how, and listen to your ideas and give you some ideas on how you can improve or where to get started or what equipment to use. Can I be a guest on your podcast?
You know what I mean? Exactly.
It's so there's just the information is so freely given, and everybody has been just so kind to each other, regardless of where you come from, what you do, or what kind of content you're creating. It's just been very open. So that community is how we should be acting as human beings, for one.
Absolutely. No, without a doubt.
But seeing how it happens and around a medium format that is exponentially exploding right now. Even before COVID happened, year over year, podcast listening is increasing by 30% every year.
Every year.
To the point to where, everybody's got a phone in their pocket, so everybody's connected to the internet. But they did a study that half of the people on the internet listen to at least one podcast per month, but most of them are listening to more.
Yeah.
And so it shows that there is a need for that audio format of media if we want to consume it. There's a reason why every HBO major show that comes out also has an accompanying podcast with it. There's a reason why all your major stars and comedians, they all have podcasts. It's a growing medium that's, obviously they would invest it in if it wasn't for the long term.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So seeing where that's growing, I've also looked and done the research on, every other medium that's come along before it. So newspapers, magazines, TV, radio. Arkansas is always the very last to join. Anytime any of those get invented, there is a gap of from 50 years to 120 years before they start dipping their toes into it officially. And so right now we can ride the wave. We can actually go forward. We've got the potential to move forward, further than either one of the coasts right now, because we've heard all of their opinions. We've seen all their lifestyles. We've seen, a lot of the culture and everything that builds up around that. Not a lot of people are exposed to this stuff in Arkansas, except for when you come to Arkansas. Right. And so we have our own unique points of view because of that, because we're sort of separated and we're those flyover states. And, they always tell you to use your voice. And this is literally using your voice. And everybody, I tell this is my go-to thing that I tell everybody is that nobody has a beginning or a middle or an ending like you do. Everybody stands to learn something from you.
Yeah.
Either it's an experience you went through or something professional you're, supercharged in. Either way, your story is original. It's unique. You're a unique human being, and somebody needs to hear your story and learn from you. You're going to impact somebody's life. So with Arkansas being so hungry and it being such an exploding medium, us being able to sort of just be a catalyst for that and be like, hey, don't let that barrier to entry, which it's so low because of the equipment, right? So you can record on your phone and send it out as a podcast.
There is no excuse.
Right.
I tell people all the time. I remember during the pandemic, even before that, when Anchor, you just had a really simple way. Anchor, you could just record your thoughts or ideas or just have a little soliloquy on your own in Anchor and then push it out to the world. I thought that was genius. I think that's one of the reasons why Spotify purchased Anchor. So, And so just to kind of access that, what's the best way to describe it? It's just an ability to create something instantly that then you can just push out. And then you can get feedback right away.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I would post my stuff on Anchor, I'd have responses back within an hour or more. Somebody would have a comment or something to say about what I'd have either some type of call to action or, hey, what do you think about what I just shared? I'd love your thoughts. Hit me back. And then, you'd get feedback. And that's the nice part about podcasting is that, in some instances, you can create a feedback loop that kind of keeps reinforcing whatever ideas you're sharing and putting out there in the world.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
it's something that's impressing me is that, we've been to several colleges and spoken there, or several events for the Society of Professional Journalism and that type of thing. And these college kids or even high schoolers, we've judged some projects from high schoolers as well. They'll create an 8 minutes episode of a podcast and then send it with their album art and all the different things and a description and who their guests are, who their target audience is. And it's amazing like how easy it is to grasp. And I mean, like these kids, I'll honestly put in some work, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, it's amazing that like they get it already. You know what I mean?
It's the fastest growing demographic. I think when Edison Research put their numbers out back in March, I think about a month ago, as at the time of recording this, I want to say the fastest growing segment is 12 to 24, age range of 12 to 24. Yeah. And it's insane how quickly people are picking it up. Even my son, who's in 8th grade at Woodland Junior High School here in Fayetteville, his teacher teaches about podcasting. And they actually have listened to my podcast in that classroom. My son was so embarrassed by it. But he was like, yeah, Dad, they played your podcast today. And my teacher loves your podcast, because he'd been listening to it for a while. But, just encouraging kids to, get out there and tell your story. And kids are telling their story on TikTok. Yeah. So it's the same principle. It's just a longer format for you. It's not 45 seconds. It's not 30 seconds. It's a chance for you really to share a complete thought and or idea. Yes. And I don't think there's a better way. I tell anybody, fight me if you can find a better way to share your ideas than in podcasting.
Exactly right. Yeah. And when people think of, in podcasting, typically what we get from the ideas that we're hearing, or it's usually like what we're doing right now, right? To talking heads. We're bouncing the conversation back and forth like it's tennis, right? But there are so many other ways to use podcasting to tell a story or to use as art. And so there's fictional podcasting, of course, where, you have voice actors, or even if you're, a one person reading a script, like those radio plays we were just talking about earlier. Yeah. That's a form of that. But we've collected a database of all the podcasters and all the podcasts that are being produced in Arkansas. We have over 250 in our database, but only 2 of them are fiction.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
Active.
Okay.
So there's been a few in the past, but they only
didn't one of them come to last year's event?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. You have quite. There's all kinds of genres over there. One of the biggest genres that a lot of people really gravitate towards, which kind of came out of this whole reality TV, is all true crime, which is off the charts. And I remember the young woman talking about the true crime podcast that she created, and she was doing some research on several events that had happened around Arkansas, which I thought was really interesting. And you're seeing more and more of that. The Lisk, the Long Island serial killer, was featured on a podcast. It was a true crime podcast. And part of what the prosecution said helped was that podcast, the information that went out there jarred a lot of people's memories about events that had taken place 15 to 20 years earlier. Wow. And so, that guy is I'm not going to say he's wholly in jail because of the podcast. Yeah. He's in jail because they got some DNA evidence, but a lot of that was talked about, and some of it even materialized through the research in the podcast. And so I think it's interesting. As a matter of fact, one of the things that the podcast did highlight was the inactivity on behalf of the local police department that was there in Long Island that should have done a better job. And here you have a young lady who was doing the podcast that was exposing things that they didn't even expose. And so I just think it's really valuable. People don't realize how valuable one voice can be out there. And again, I say it all the time, just like I'm sharing my platform with you for you to share your story. Everybody has a story that needs to be shared.
No, for sure.
Full stop. There's no 2 ways about it. Everybody that's listening to this, you're listening to my voice right now. You have a story to share. You may have to come see me or Ty and get on our podcast. But the bottom line is you have a story to share. And eventually somebody's going to get you in front of a mic for you to share those stories.
Absolutely. Can I talk about a couple of things we're working on right now?
Absolutely.
So there's 2 podcasts that we're producing currently, and one of them is about recovery centers in Arkansas. And
I saw that. I saw you working on that.
Yeah. So telling those stories of people you don't normally think about that are in society. And I've been so surprised because I've got no experience in this, and just kind of went in cold and just started doing interviews with people that have lived experience and people that are lawmakers. And we've interviewed, people that run recovery centers, and just talking about how far has Arkansas come, what's available now, and what do we have to do for a sustainable future to help people that are, overcoming substance abuse to actually live a life. And how would Arkansas look if we didn't have any recovery centers, period?
Right.
Because one serious thing that we're looking at, politically right now is like a lot of lawmakers are showing that they don't believe in second chances and they're trying to open more prisons, right? Yeah. And so just the answer is to arrest until we fill our prisons and keep going. But it's not helping or improving lives of individuals or families. And It's just amazing to hear the stories of what people are dealing with and like the success stories, but also you're hearing the tragedies that have come, people that were pregnant and using drugs at the time. And it's insane. So yeah, that's an ongoing one we're doing right now. Another one you just mentioned, storytelling and the difference of it can make, through podcasting. We're about to start production with the Arkansas State Archive.
Okay.
And it's going to be a podcast that's historical about Wiley Jones. And you probably don't know that name. And it's a shame that we don't know that name in Arkansas because we have a lot of things that we take advantage of that we have to thank him for. And so he was one of the first wealthy African Americans in Arkansas.
Okay.
He was born into slavery and had several brothers and sisters, and his father was his slaver. And of course, all of his brothers and sisters the same. And his mother was, they were all property of this one guy who said that after he died, that there was supposed to be a will that would release them, and surprise, he kicks the bucket. There's no paper to be found. So they get sold with another estate to another family. Wiley ends up as a young child having to go into the Civil War to be a camp servant. And like, it's insane that the whole story is just absolutely crazy. But he started picking up after the Emancipation Proclamation and like the Black communities were starting to build around Arkansas,
sure,
but particularly around Pine Bluff, which is where he was around. And he started barbershop. He started doing all these different things and lending money to people in the community and building out the Black community that was trying to orient themselves and figure out, well, how do we live in this society? After, there's obviously a lot of racism surrounding everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, but some of the things that he created, like we still use today, like we have Oaklawn to thank for him because of the horse races that he was running for the colored fairs. We have the Pine Bluff Transit system to thank for him because of the horse and cart system that he had. There's just a lot of things in state that we sort of take for granted that were started by this freed man that we don't know the name of, and you can't just pull a book off of a library shelf and read his story.
About it.
Right?
Yeah.
There's like one page in the Arkansas Encyclopedia Online that the library has put together, but we've been doing all this research of hundreds of newspaper articles and trying to piece together what the story is because a lot of papers wouldn't even cover him because he was Black, and so anything even entrepreneurial that he was doing that was great, they're not going to cover it.
Yeah, sure.
So we're trying to do relics, and it's so insane.
Have you talked to the archivist here at the University of Arkansas?
I haven't yet, no.
Okay, yeah. I actually got to introduce you to a friend of mine who works in that, and he does a lot of research around information that is not readily available.
Oh, wow.
And how you access that information. And, he did a talk for my former Rotary Club about, we talked about the Elaine Massacre and talked about some other little known facts about Arkansas as a whole. There's a lot of history in Arkansas, which people aren't always privy to. That's why I love spending time at the Pryor Center. And the Pryor Center, right up here, up the street from where we are, and it sits right on Fayetteville Square. And former Senator and former Governor Pryor just passed away recently, but his Pryor Center is a repository of oral tradition. There's all kinds of stories that are encapsulated on audio, on video. It's all up there at the Pryor Center. So you actually need to go up there and connect with them as well. So they are archivists and they have a lot of information. I would be surprised if they didn't have something on Wiley Jones. So yeah, definitely a good place to connect with, but it just speaks to how important it is
for sure
to capture and archive this information for future generations, right? And just for edification. But, I can see something like this becoming a movie that you mess around and 4 or 5 years from now, it's become a labor of love. And then all of a sudden we see that, Spielberg or somebody else wants to make a movie out of this. Yes. So, but yeah, I think the beauty of it, I know Aaron Mankey, who has the Lore podcast, and I remember when he got that first started, and now he has Cabinet of Curiosities, and he has a whole thing. I love Cabinet of Curiosities because Cabinet of Curiosities is like a little bite-sized version of information, and you just can't beat it. It's the best 10 minutes that you'll ever get. And trust me when I say this, it will not be wasted time. The stories are great. And even the research that goes into those stories, the behind the scenes makes it even better. But that's the reason why. Aaron started Lore, and Lore led to Amazon signing him to do 2 seasons of the Lore podcast, but as a show. And so I got to see several of my favorite podcast episodes in visual format, which I thought was kind of cool.
Right.
And it just goes to show you that anything's possible. So when I say that, I'm not saying that just like, oh, wouldn't it be great if it could really happen, right? We could see a Wiley Jones on the silver screen. And I think that would be very cool. So
what's interesting with that partnership with the Arkansas State Archive is, like you said, it's for generations to see it. But like, it's not just being saved on the internet with them, which is new for us. But like, they also want the episodes on sort of a flash drive, and they're going to store it in the actual state archive.
Oh,
and
wow.
So anything ever happens to the internet, we still have those files in that story.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I love that. And there's something to be said for that. And I want to say that the Federal Archives has some variation of that to save all of this information, that especially this digital information. Because, I was reading an article somewhere, and this was kind of disturbing at the same time, but archivists and people that like professional photographers are like, your digital photographs may not last as long as you think they're going to last. And I started thinking about it, and then I started doing some research, and there's only like really one type of photography that has a long type, and it's related to infusing silver onto the plate of the photography plate. And you have to kind of go back old school where imagine the hood over your head, and you expose the plate of film to an image, and that affords you the ability to create something that's quote unquote long lasting. But I listened to that episode about the fact that these digital images that we all hold in our phones, some up to the amount of, I think I have like 24,000 pictures in my phone, that maybe one day I may not have access to them the way I think I would. Just because it's digital, you think, oh, it's that. But there's some digital information does erode over time. So I just think it's interesting that they would be able to keep a copy of your podcast in a state archive like that, so that somebody else will have access to it, even if, like you said, everything falls by the wayside.
If we fall into a dystopia.
Somebody
brushes the dust away. And
exactly. So listen, anything's possible. Yeah. But so listen, talk to me real quickly about some of the aha moments that you have experienced, specifically with companies or folks that you have invited on the podcast that were kind of maybe leery about doing a podcast, but then became like your biggest fans around the whole concept of it. Do you have anybody that you can think of? I have several, but I was just curious to know, because you highlighted one thing that I have found to be one of the most valuable aspects of podcasting, is that there is not a person that I don't talk to that doesn't say yes to me when I say, hey, I'd like to interview you on the podcast. And it just opens up doors that you just can't normally get open. You know what it's like. You get unsolicited emails. People reach out to you to try to sell you stuff on LinkedIn and elsewhere.
I just had one earlier.
Yeah, you know how it is. Yeah. So it's like, it's totally different. Like our relationship is different because it's different because we had connected with our cast in the first place, but it's totally different when you do this. This is a much more intimate setting to sit down and have somebody share, and you share your platform with them. It just makes for a much easier conversation as you go on. And so I was just curious to know if you had anything specifically that you want to share.
One comes to mind. We've helped. So there's an organization, it's called Alzheimer's Arkansas, that we've helped them put their podcast together.
Yep.
And they're sort of having a conversation about what it's like to experience when your family member all of a sudden needs care. And they're starting to act different. Grandpa's doesn't have any pants on and he's checking the mail.
Absolutely.
Why is dad throwing the applesauce on the wall? So like just, those types of things, and like what to expect, because those conversations really aren't being had. And like, there's no way to really prepare for it until, somebody does suffer from dementia that's nearby you. And so it's been interesting. They were sort of interested in having that pod, sort of be on there, but they were just going to talk about, dementia in general. And then it just sort of evolved over time, and we're having these, actual caretakers and people that are deciding laws, and doctors, that are running these different organizations that are helping people with dementia. And like, it's fostered sort of a community around it. You know what I mean? Where there's such a support system. When we had the podcast launch party, all the people there that was just to support that was amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the organization itself, you know, they were just like, we'll try it to get some information on it. But then they had it, you know, underwritten. And so like it was backed fully. But now, yeah, it's in full swing. And
so they're probably really like, when can we do the next season?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and that's the beauty of it too. And this is something that I'll share with our listeners, especially those of you that might be on the fence and haven't come to somebody like Ty or myself to inquire about what it would look like for you to start a podcast. What I tell people all the time is I would never recommend anybody do what I'm doing with a weekly podcast. I have been doing this podcast every week for 5 years, right? It's like, I mean, you can, if it's Monday, there's a new I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. I haven't missed a Monday in more than 60 months. And so,
wow.
And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that for the average person that is going to come out and do a podcast and share your story, just do a season.
Yeah.
And a season could be 6, it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 12 episodes, but that's enough to kind of put yourself out there and then, you know, take the baby steps after that and put it out there for general consumption, get some feedback, make some tweaks, and then come back with season 2 and then come back with season 3.
Yes.
It's like, it's the same way that we look at episodes of TV shows.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Seinfeld ran 22 episodes a year. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was great. And there was an arc in those shows. And so I think it's important that people need to understand the value of storytelling from that perspective and not feel like, oh my gosh, if I start recording and telling a story, I can never stop. Nobody's ever suggesting that.
Right.
You know, you can take pauses, you can take breaks, you can even pivot and try something else. You can do a show for a while and then you say, okay, I'm going to wrap that up and I want to go in a different direction. That's the beauty of podcasting.
Yeah. And your pilot episode doesn't have to be the best you've ever done.
No.
Because it's going to be the worst one you've ever done, I promise.
It really will be. And I always talk about some of my friends and they always highlight it. Pat Flynn, who does a Smart Passive Income podcast, and he and I have known each other for a long time. And I remember him saying, man, listen, I keep my first episode up so everybody can hear. And I point to everyone to say, listen to this, because that's where I started. And he said it's so painful to listen to because it's just a lot of ums and ahs and stammers. And it's just the way it is. But over time, you find your cadence, you find your voice, your intonation. You learn to breathe from your diaphragm so that you're not mouth breathing all over the microphone. There's just a million things that ultimately change over time. And you just get better and better and better. And that's why I always tell people the easiest way to become good at podcasting is to just be willing to press record.
Absolutely. See, I'm naturally an introvert. And like I've got a social meter. I start talking to people and like it drains. You know what I mean? At varying rates.
I'm there too. I'm there too.
But there's a point in the day where I just got to go in a dark room by myself and no other human beings. I don't want to hear anybody. Right. I got to recharge my batteries.
Right.
But yeah, so podcasting in that sense, like it can be intimidating. You know, once you get behind the mic, you know, even if you psych yourself up beforehand and then you're like, all right, I got my intro ready. I wrote my script out and everything. I'm just going to sit down, hit record. I'm going to get it. You know, it's like, and then you sit down and like you start questioning all the choices in your life.
Oh my God.
How did I end up here?
It's crazy. It's crazy. And then you put out some of your best content ever. And then you're like, okay, that was all worthwhile.
It wasn't so bad.
It wasn't so bad.
It's like getting off the roller coaster.
Yeah, man, listen, I get it. So tell me, for our audience, how could they and how can they participate in the Arcast event that's coming up in the fall? So at the time of recording this, we're in April of 2024, and the event is in November, right?
Yeah. So there's
2 events.
It's a Spence. Yeah. So if we're talking Northwest, then it's in November.
It's November, and the Little Rock one is
September.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and the reason why is because you've kind of focused on both the central and southern Arkansas for Little Rock and then Northwest Arkansas for this area. Yeah.
So the Little Rock is September 14th and it's at the Delta Hotels, and it's a full day of podcast networking and breakouts and speakers and just a artist alley. And we're calling it the Arcast Kickoff. And so that's just one day kickoff. And then on October 16th, we are going to be at the Ron Robinson Theater in Little Rock doing a live Halloween podcast recording.
Okay.
That's going to be a lot of fun. with a lot of spooky guests and some surprises. I don't want to give anything away.
No,
it's
fine.
It's hard
that's
to promote
fine.
it without giving anything away.
We'll put a link to the whole program on our show notes.
Okay.
So anybody listening to this, and even if you listen to this in December or January of 2025, there'll be a link there. You should follow Rcast. You should join their email list and stay abreast of all the stuff that they're doing, because there will continue to be new programs offered that you can take part in.
For sure. Yeah. And something new that we're proud of this year is like the main Rcast is going to be here in Fayetteville this year from November 14th through the 16th. And so we're kicking that event off on the 14th with the very first Rcast Awards.
Okay.
And so we are giving awards out to celebrate excellence of Southern podcasting. And that doesn't only include Arkansas. It's also Mississippi, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Nice.
And so we've sent out the invite to all those states. We're like, here, submit your best. And then we're going to let the public vote on it between September and November. And then we'll announce the winners that night and have a big celebration. Yeah.
That's going to be exciting.
It's going to be fun. And then we've got 2 days of the networking and artist alleys and sponsors and vendors and just a lot of podcasting stuff. If you've ever even had an inkling of an interest in podcasts, there's going to be something there for you. Yeah. And then we'll end it on the 16th. That night, we'll have a podcast pitch event.
Okay. Very cool. And the pitch event will be for people to pitch.
Idea for a podcast, and the winners will get a pretty large starting, kickoff package for them, including equipment and gift cards. And this year we've got a sponsor for podcast hosting called Dystopia. They're out of California.
Okay.
And what they're going to be doing is offering the winners a lifetime free hosting with their podcast platform. And of course, it does a lot more than just hosting. There's a lot of AI tech that's integrated into it. And so it's really awesome. And so we're really happy to have them on as sponsors this year.
Good. Well, that's exciting. Well, I certainly would encourage everyone listening to this to come on out. If for no other reason, podcasters are cool people.
Oh, yeah.
And you will meet some really cool people. You'll meet me there if you come to the event. And certainly it's going to be at the fabulous Fayetteville Public Library.
That's right. Event Center.
And in the Event Center, which is a beautiful facility. And then, it's just, you can learn and see. And what I tell people all the time is that, especially if you live in Fayetteville, but even if you live in Benton County, it doesn't really matter. You can get a library card for Fayetteville and utilize their facilities to record a podcast. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize.
I went in there earlier, and I was so impressed with the studios and the video studio. I want a library card.
It's
I want to just get
you could probably get one.
I might buy a house just to get a library card here.
You could probably get one. No, it's really nice, and I'm hoping that other libraries take note of that, because they didn't just didn't come out of thin air. They went around the world and did their research on some of the top libraries to see what were they offering, what were they making available. And, libraries have actually fundamentally changed over the years. It's not just a place to come get a book. There are other things that you could do. Here, you can work on your pilot's license. You can work on your CDL driver's license. You can shoot a film. You can cut an album. You can create a podcast.
Yes.
It's a little bit of everything, right? And this is not your grandparents' library.
Right.
Because in my library where I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, we didn't have nearly any of those things. We did have tapes, and that's where I listened to H.G. Wells and War of the Worlds and The Phantom and all that good stuff. Yeah. But that was on cassette tape. And some of the people listening to this are going to be like, what is a cassette tape? So that's how we used to listen to things back in the day. But, it definitely, the options are plentiful. Mm-hmm. They really are. And I would encourage anyone listening to this that's in this area on the 14th, 15th, or 16th of November, you need to come out. If you happen to be listening to this and you're down in Little Rock on the 14th of September, you need to participate in that event. And if you're around and you like the scariness of Halloween, then the 16th of October of 2024, you need to check that out. And again, if you're listening to this and it's 2025 or later, just visit Rcast's website. And what is the website address?
It's arkansaspodcasters.org.
arkansaspodcasters.org. And is there a link to the Rcast program?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, it's all over our page. Can't miss it.
So
I'll say, or you could just get a time machine and go back and attend the conference and come back and be like, I was there.
I was there. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, Ty, man, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, driving up here from Little Rock, especially, man. And I owe you for that. But just, I really want, if nobody else has encouraged you, my encouragement is simply keep telling the stories, keep pushing yourself in this genre of podcasting, because, people are going to look back in 10 years and be like, wow, I was at the forefront of it. I was early on in podcasting, and look how much it's grown and matured, because people will look back and say, oh, yeah, those guys in Arkansas were the ones that set the standard for starting a nonprofit for podcasting, and look at where things are now. Yeah. So I really want to encourage you to keep doing that. Keep submitting speaking material for different events, PodFest, more podcast movement events. Just get out there and continue to tell your story, because more people need to hear it. And you don't know whose life you'll impact just by virtue of your willingness to press record and your willingness to go out there and tell others about it. So I just really want to encourage you to continue doing that. And I wish you, Brittany and Karen, nothing but continued success as you guys grow this thing. And just know that I Am Northwest Arkansas and our community is always here to support anything that you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Randy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, folks, there you have it. Another episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. To learn more about us or to read or download the show notes from today's episode, visit IamNorthwestArkansas.com. You can listen to this podcast and sign up for our free newsletter to keep up with us and all things NWA. Sign up today. You can follow the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast wherever you listen to it. And please, please, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Remember, our podcast comes out every Monday, rain or shine. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you back here next week for another new episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit IamNorthwestArkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.